So a few announcements before we get started. I'm Steve Schmidt. I'm the Programs Chairman Committee for the Historical Society. And first I'd like to say our next program is going to be November 21st. That's our annual meeting. And Benny Schultz is going to give us a preview of a new display they're putting together for the Meeker House. It's really part 2 of the journey to Delaware. It's Wilderness Transport. So we'll be giving a preview of that. A couple of other events that are actually sold out that are coming up soon. On October, Saturday the 26th, there's a Harvest Victorian tea. It's sold out there. I don't know if there's a waiting list, and I'm sure we'll do another one in the future. And then on November 14th, we're doing a house research history class at Kreider, and that's also sold out. But if you're interested, if anyone's ever interested in doing that, I'm sure we put on another one, right, Susan? There you go. Susan Logan's in charge. In January, we'll be starting our next year 2025 programs, and the theme for the year is agriculture. So we'll have our first program in January. Will be Zoom because of the weather. And it'll be about companies here in Delaware County that made agricultural equipment. So we'll go through that history, some good stories there. And the complete list of our 2025 programs is on the website here if you want to look at that. So what I'd like to do now is introduce Reverend Adam Poe that's going to talk to us tonight. So Reverend Poe was born in 1804 to Andrew and Nancy Poe. The family was living in New Lisbon, which is up by Columbiana, Ohio. At the time, he and his twin sister, Sarah, were the first 2 children born out of 12. And they also had another pair of twins later on, numbers 5 and 6. Wow. I was talking to my mother about, just think about somebody having twins in 1804. You know, they didn't make ultrasounds out of logs in those days. His father, Andrew, worked as a teamster during the War of 1812. He wasn't in the military, but he was working for the government, hauling materials for the military services. The family, after the war, they moved to East Greenville, Ohio, which was west of Massillon. And Andrew purchased several large tracts of land that he farmed in the area. Adam and his brother Charles went off to Navarre, which was back at the time was called Rochester, Navarre, Ohio, and started a very successful grain mill. And because they were successful, they had money, so they were also making loans to their neighbors in the town. And there was an economic panic, and they lost everything. So, and they built a mansion, which I was trying to find on Google Maps. Supposedly it's still there, the house that they built, the 2 brothers. Andrew went on to start another business, but Adam, first he got married. He married Elizabeth Hosford in 1825. And her family had come from Connecticut to Westfield in Medina County, Ohio. They may have met at a camp meeting. Back in those days, they had a lot of camp meetings where people would come from 30, 40 miles around for 4 or 5 days of preaching, trying to convert as many people as they could. That's where they may have met. Shortly after the marriage, though, Adam announced to his wife that he felt the call to the ministry. She knew what that was going to involve and knew the sacrifice involved, but she was very supportive of him anyway. He got, 2 months after they were married, he got his license to preach. It was issued by presiding Elder McMahon of the Methodist Episcopal Church. That's where he got his license. So he started as a circuit rider. And circuit riders were traveling clergy that would go out on a predefined route up to 400 miles, and it might take them 4 to 6 weeks to cover that territory, preaching, staying at different houses. If there was a church, possibly preaching there, but otherwise at someone's home or in a barn. So that's how he started. It didn't pay well. It was $100 a year for a single man, $200 for a married man. he did that up until 1840, and he was having a lot of lung issues, bronchitis, which he blamed on having to speak loudly to audiences, especially at camp meetings where you had a lot of people and you really had to shout to be heard. So in 1840, each year the Methodist Episcopal Church would have an annual meeting, and that's where they would assign circuits to the ministers so they knew where they were going to go for the next year, which route they were going to be taking. But in 1840, because of health issues, and the William Street Methodist Episcopal Church in Delaware had grown to the point where it needed to minister, they gave him that assignment called stationary assignment because he was just going to stay and preach in the one church. So that kind of brings us up to where I think that Reverend Poe wants to start his talk. I'm not sure where he is. He may be running a little late. But meanwhile, I wanted to tell you that the information I got was from a book by Melissa Strangeland, and she is the 3 times great-granddaughter of Adam Poe. And it's a very interesting book. It's available from Daystar Publishing. It's $15. Actually, Susan Logan's credited in it for helping with the research that went into this book. And I'm going to finish reading it, and I'm going to donate it to the Historical Society, but it's very well done. So, I wonder where Reverend Poe, he's supposed to be here about now. We're actually running a few minutes late, so he's even later than I thought.
The horse didn't go through.
Yeah, he may have had horse trouble. I asked him if he had a PowerPoint presentation, and he just looked at me like, what are you talking about? How do you like the programs in the kind of in the round? I like it, because usually we have a PowerPoint, so we're facing that way, but this is kind of unimpeded. I heard it. I heard horse clops. Oh, Reverend Poe. Saddle sore? Reverend Poe, it's an honor to see you, sir. I'd like you to meet this wonderful audience we have here, and would love to hear their talk.
Well, I'm sorry to have been delayed. It wasn't really my fault, but that's no excuse. I'm still together as a team with my beloved horse, Blessed. She and I rode 400-mile circuits every year, all around eastern Ohio, northern Ohio, southern Ohio. So we thought we'd ride down from Ashland today, where you might say, I'm now living a rather grave existence. And concerned about Blessed because she's an old gray mare, and she ain't what she used to be. But then neither am I. The sad thing was we were riding down through Delaware thinking we'd see some of the old sites. The 2-story drugstore there on the corner of William and Sandusky, which was always for us a landmark that we were almost home to William Street Methodist Episcopal Church. But on the way over the bridge, she threw a shoe. And I've spent the last 3 hours looking all over Delaware for a smithy. And I'm sad to say that I couldn't find a one. Now, Blessed and I are used to the streets of Delaware being ruts. sand roads, and when it rained, they were muddy ruts. And I'd say that it looks to me like Delaware's roads have fallen on hard times. So Blessed is not doing all that well, but we hope to get back to Ashland yet today. I am thrilled to be with you. And I thank Brother Steve for his kind remarks that triggered some of the memories in this old goat's brain. And I'd like to remember some of those with you. Perhaps I should suggest, first of all, that this situation is all new to me. We didn't have talking sticks in my day. We had to project in the midst of the fields and the prisons and the jails. And that's exactly why I've lost my voice over the last few years. 14 years I traveled that. But to be with you tonight is to understand that we have a common experience. Our love of this community. Our love of the stories that brought us together in this community. I have 4 points. I know preachers usually have 3 points in a poem. But I've got 4 points tonight, and I'm not going to tell you what I'm doing which one. But these are the points. I'm going to talk about horses. Already did, but I'll talk more about horses. I'm going to talk about money. I'm going to talk about annoyances. And I'm going to talk about vision. But I want to start with horses because Brother Steve mentioned my father was a teamster. Anyone know what a teamster is?
Driving the wagon.
Thank you. Teamster is a horse driver. My father in 1812, when I was only 8 years old, drove a team of horses and helped supply the U.S. government military with supplies. And in my day, there was nothing more honorable a profession than to be a teamster. I don't know if that's still a profession now. But I think the idea of teamsters is a core to our historical culture. Well, then, my brother and I thought we'd move beyond the farm a little bit, which my father also had in those days. By the way, my brother and I and all my siblings, we were born in a log cabin. Abe Lincoln wasn't the only one born in a log cabin. But that was normal. This whole community, mainly log cabins. Even in the heart of Delaware, the village of Delaware, log cabins. And my brother and I decided that we'd venture off and start a grain mill, because agriculture at that time was growing and expanding. And we made money. Lots of money. And in those days, anybody who was responsible and made money was also the local banker. And so we took most of our savings, most of our earnings, and we'd loan it to other business people in the community around us. And then by 1825, there was such an economic crisis that every loan we had out there was defaulted on. But that's okay. For me, David went on and did a the things. I had a vision. It was a camp meeting. Not unlike this, except we were outdoors. Now, a camp meeting is kind of like a rally, and I hear in your day it's probably more like a political convention. People come up and make speeches and all kinds of do this and do that. And people get excited and say, I'm going there. And my heart was strangely warmed. So I connected myself with the spirit and the words of what you might call that first circuit rider, that Episcopal priest in England, who, even though he was a scholar, traveled around to the charmaids and the prisoners and the workers and met with them in groups like this and said, you too matter. You too matter. God has a place for you in God's kingdom. And that man, you may know his name, John Wesley, and that has a piece of relationship to a story I'm going to tell you later on. So at the camp meeting, we not only got converted and convicted, some of us got connected. And boy, did I get connected. So I started the camp meetings in 1821, and by 1825, I found myself married to the most wonderful woman in the world. And I broke it to her just a few months after we were married that I was off to get my license. She said, license for what? And I said, license to preach. And she said, does that mean you're going to be a circuit rider? I said, yeah. She said, okay, we'll do it. So I got my horse, Beloved, and we started Sandusky, Norwalk, all the areas up around Ashland, all the way down to the Cincinnati River, round and round. 400 miles a year. We were out 4 to 6 weeks at a time, so my dear wife had to keep home and hearth together. And the pay in that day was pretty substantial. As Brother Stephen mentioned, I made $200 a year. And we lived well on that. Not fancy, but well. But it turned out that while I was doing the circuit riding and my wife was home keeping the fires burning, there were other fires burning that I hadn't even heard about yet. There was a place, a village called Delaware. And there was a fellow named Hosea Williams. Now, the village of Delaware was building up on the west side of the river. But Hosea Williams had a vision. He said, I'm going to buy 100 acres on the east side of the river. I'm going to own all that property. And I'm going to build me a railroad depot. Because I think my vision is that if Delaware had a railroad depot, we could become a thriving place for tourists and visitors and business people. And I'm so confident of my vision that I'm going to start a bank called the Delaware Bank. Delaware National Bank. Kept it big. And then Hosea Williams ran into another character in town by the name of Thomas Powell. Now, Thomas wasn't interested in making money. Thomas was interested in dealing with what was the Deer Lick over at the White Sulphur Springs. He said, that's just sitting there. We got to build us a hotel there. And so he got together with Hosea and they worked it out, and by 1844, they had built, 1834, let me get my age. 1834, they built a hotel, 3-story monster. And they had plans to really make Delaware thrive. Except the $25,000 that Powell had spent on the hotel was pretty much his major investment. He wasn't very wealthy either. He was our state representative, and then later our state senator, and then he was the probate judge. So he was committed to the community in a very different way than Hosea Williams. Well, in order to make that hotel work, they brought in something that we called whiskey. And they were going to use the railroad depot to bring in folk and bring them to the White Sulphur Springs by giving them whiskey. And by 1840, Judge Powell started nosing around town that maybe he'd sell the place. He wanted $25,000 for it. Well, there's nothing that annoys an old Methodist circuit rider more than whiskey. Whiskey is the sin and the devil of our culture. At least it was then. And I was annoyed. How did I get annoyed? Another horse story. In 1840, 6 years after the hotel that we ended up calling the Mansion House Hotel. In 1840, the higher-ups in the Methodist Episcopal Church heard that my voice was shot. And so they were going to supernumerate me. Now, I don't know, if you're not a Methodist, you may never have heard that term. But supernumerate doesn't mean you're a figure or a big figure. It means you're put out to pasture. You get a station, which means you stop riding, beloved, blessed, and you settle down. I wasn't that old. I was about 35 years old. But I came to this town and I got to know it a little bit and fell in love with the folks. There's about 900 folks in town back then. It were a big village. But I started hearing the rumblings about there's this damnable whiskey-sodded mansion house down there at Sulphur Springs, and we got to do something about it. Pastor, what are you going to do? Don't ever say that to a pastor. Things might happen. I was so annoyed that I said, no more circuit riding for me. I'm going to stay here, and I'm going to fulfill another vision I've always had, and that is, wouldn't it be wonderful if the Methodist Episcopal Church had a college? And so, there's no more important force in the world than an idea whose time has come. Now, Judge Powell, back to him, that rascal old fellow. I suspect that if he kept up with what he was doing, they're probably going to name a town after him after a while. He was a good man, but he was a businessman and a rascal. $25 on the table. I said, Judge, we don't have that kind of money in this town. How about $10,000? Well, I've never seen a judge choke quite as bad as he did, but we got through that conversation. And he said, let's see what you can do. So there were 900 folks in our village. And I want you to know that I walked those muddy ruts of the streets of Delaware and visited the home of every one of those 900 people. And you know, averages don't always work out like you'd like, but of the 900 people, 172 gave money. How did that happen? By one-on-one conversation. We have a need, we have a vision, we have a plan, but we can't do it without you. And I sometimes did something that Methodist ministers probably shouldn't do. I pitted neighbors against each other. One of my favorite people in town was old Hiram Andrews. And he had just built that beautiful white building for his daughters. And it was a piece of beauty. So I went over to Hiram and I said, Hiram, we got to raise $10,000. Why do you start? He said, I'll give you $60. I said, well, that's a good start. So then I walked across the street to Benjamin Powers' house. I said, hey, Benjamin, your neighbor Hiram's given us $60. What do you think you could do? He said, I'll give you $100. So I walked back over to Hiram's house and I said, Hiram, I understand Ben's going to give us $100. How does it make you feel? Hiram said, good for Ben. And we only got $60 out of Brother Andrews. But he had a good reason. He said, listen, Pastor Paul, I have sunk my worldly goods into this house for my daughters, and everything I have left over I have given to St. Peter's Church next door. And we've hauled up the limestone from the lime quarry, and we have built this church. And I want that to be a historic legacy for my spiritual well-being. Well, I'm not an Episcopalian, but I was a Methodist Episcopalian, so I figured, okay, we're halfway there. But there were other folks. Some folks gave $10, some gave $15, some gave $20. Brother Meeker gave $100. Brother Griswold gave $300. But the best one, I went back to Judge Powell, and I said, Judge, you're going to have a legacy in this thing. We're going to build a college here. Don't you think you could do something? He said, yeah, I'll give you $300. He donated to the sale of his own building. That's where I decided he wasn't such a rascal after all. Judge Powell had a good heart, and he had a heart for the community. So by 1841, 1842, we had raised almost the total price. We were still short $500. So I went back to Judge Powell and I said, I've got everything but the $500. What should we do? He says, bottom line, $10,000, not going any lower. I said, Judge Powell, you know I'm an honorable man. I don't have a lot of cash in my pocket. But if I wrote you a note for $500 and had Hosea Williams sign it, would that cover the last 500? And he said, well, you got yourself a deal. So we told the Methodist Church we had a vision that has become tangible. And this was because I had an annoyance, but I didn't let stay an annoyance. By God's own will and power, I turned my annoyance into a vision. And I shared that vision with my neighbors. And we sealed the deal. Now, that's a piece of the situation here. I hear from Brother Steve that we're kind of in the same boat today. We have a need in this town to preserve a vision. And I've always said, as I did in those 900 houses I walked to, there's never any shame in passing the hat. Because when you pass the hat, you give every neighbor a chance to be a part of the vision. So with Steve's permission, I'm just going to pass the hat and sit down. How sneaky was that? And I'll have a little more to say a little bit later on.
Thank you. Mr. President. I was glad to hear you say that Brother Meeker helped donate money for this because this was his property. So just as a reminder, these monthly programs we do not charge for. We do not receive state, local, or federal funds to help with operating. It's always a challenge. So we rely on rentals here, whether it's a wedding, a birthday party, celebration of life. We also depend on membership fees and donations. So please give a donation, no matter how big or small, that will make a direct and meaningful life in our mission of historic preservation and education. I'm curious to know how many people attended Ohio Wesleyan, taught at Ohio Wesleyan, or kids went to Ohio Wesleyan. Wow, that's awesome. And then the other people are just interested in history, which we are. So please feel free to donate, and I hope that Reverend Poe gets his hat back. That's a pretty awesome hat. So as Steve mentioned, we have our annual meeting coming up on November 21st, and that's always a fun event. Members get to vote on new members, and we have a few constitutional changes which have been emailed and snail mailed out to people. So please plan on attending that. We'll have great refreshments, and it's always a good time. I think I'm done. You didn't come to hear me ramble on anyway, did you? We just found out we're receiving funds from the state of Ohio to expand and improve our parking lot. How many people have parked here in the grass and the dirt, and it's been muddy, and some of your cars get stuck? That's a real challenge when we have weddings. So we're not really sure. We have to have an 8-week period where nothing is going on, so we're kind of scrambling to come up with that. But the money's there. Senator Brenner helped us get it, and so we look for that to happen. You know, because we just got the roof redone, so we can't just like sit and rest. We got to do another project. And with 6 buildings, that's a lot of projects. Only one of the buildings was built after 1900. The rest of them are pre-1900. Isn't that insane? This barn dates to 1848. And the house next door, 1823. Although there is a part of the L that we believe is even older, maybe to 1817. So that's remarkable. And we pride ourselves in being good caregivers, good preservationists. So I'm going to turn this back over to Reverend Poe. Thank you.
I I don't know where y'all get with this muddy ruts thing. It's a bother to at weddings. Lord have mercy, that's how we lived in Delaware. The town was beautiful. There were slightly rolling hills on beyond Central, what you call Central Street now, was nothing but forests. On the east side, nothing but forests. On the west side of the river, nothing but forest except for that old whiskey-sounding mansion house. And I was annoyed by all that. And that's another lesson that I would want to offer you. I didn't want to come to Delaware. I didn't want supernumeration. I didn't want to be settled. Another name for supernumeration is put out to pasture. And they were saying to me at the age of 35, I was an old horse. Too old to plow and too young for the glue factory. So here I was stuck in Delaware. And that taught me a lesson. I came here as a minister of Christ to save all of you. And what happened was all of you saved me. We saved each other, maybe you could say, because we shared a vision. We turned my pasture into a vision. We turned my annoyance into an answer. And so by 1842, as I mentioned, we were registering with a charter. And that charter holds, I believe, I hope, I pray God, holds to this day. That Ohio Wesleyan, I got that in there. Ohio Wesleyan University would forever be an institution of education for all people, and always based and cored in the firmest of liberal principles, an open community. So by 1844, we started 17 male students and 3 professors. And by then we'd remodeled that old mansion hotel and turned the cafeteria into a chapel and classrooms and a little bit of living quarter up above. And we had ourselves a college. And the church appointed me, along with William Street, to be a Methodist agent appointed to be a steward of Ohio Wesleyan University. And you know, I kind of felt like, well, I've stirred the waters here, where to, what next? So don't you know, in a couple of years they had me back out in Norwalk and Massillon and all over the place, me and old beloved riding around. Didn't have my voice back, but I sure had my spirit back. By 1852, I decided that I wasn't done with the concept of education. College is a good thing. College is important. But what about everybody? What about all the folks in the church? We need books. And so the elders appointed me to be the agent for the Methodist Book Concern in Cincinnati, Ohio. And I spent most of my professional life doing exactly that. Then the war came on, as you well know, in 1861 to 1865, and I was down in Cincinnati again. I was an old workhorse. I was too old to plow and too young for the glue factory, so I couldn't serve. But I was so deeply committed to the cause of Abraham Lincoln's vision. Well, we'd already lived some of that here, because old Hosea Williams' image of the railroad depot we were able to work with the Underground Railroad. And through the railroad and through others going up the river, from the Ohio River up through the rivers and streams here, Alum Creek and all, we were able to have in this town houses that served in their secret lodgings upstairs, little cubby holes, as safe places for rescued slaves. And the railroad from here helped take them on up to the British colonial country of Canada. And so we were a vital part of that. But on the way to Canada, most of the slaves we got from here would go up Alum Creek and stay with the Mennonite order to have them be safe. And that was so important to the safety of human beings. So, Underground Railroad, importance of Methodist book collection, getting books into the hands of everyday folk, enhancing reading. Well, a couple of the professors up at Baldwin College got a hold of some of that, and they said, you know, old Adam, you ought to get a doctorate. So in 1862, they gave me an honorary doctorate, so now I get to call myself Reverend Dr. Poe. But I never was in this for the titles. I was in this because out of my love for Christ, it started at that camp meeting back in 1821. I had a vision to serve God as tangibly and as articulately and as fervently as I could. For all those reasons, I am deeply honored that you invited me back here tonight. I've got a crippled horse to get back up to Ashland tonight, so I'm going to be on my way. But I can't thank you enough for being brothers and sisters in my community, even yet today. God's blessing. May the mercy and grace of Christ and all of God's children, every faith and every face, be part of who you are and who you will always be. Amen.
Don't forget your coat, it's supposed to get cold and rainy tonight. Get your hat. This is the book, if anybody wanted to take a look at it or get a picture of it. Like I said, it's only $15. It's a great read about Adam Poe by one of his descendants. So with that, thanks for everybody for coming.
What's the name of it?
It's called Adam Poe, Evangelist and Faithful Servant. So,
Very nice.
thanks everybody for coming.